Hey teammates, welcome back to Teaching with Tania. I have Miss J here. You want to introduce yourself and what do you teach?
Hi, I'm Miss J. I'm a math lead. I support teachers and I also teach 8th grade math.
What is your passion for teaching?
I think my main passion for teaching, mathematics is just for students to realize that math is very accessible and they can be leaders in mathematics. I think a lot of people think that you're either born great at doing math or you're just not a math person, but that's not the case. It's just how you're going about different techniques in math.
I love that. Put it nice and simple because I'm a math whiz, but being able to teach it to students is like a whole different craft. So we've been talking about small groups on my channel. So I first want to ask you, what is the purpose of small groups and how do you like to use them?
So the main purpose I use for small groups is it's a couple of ways. If I have students that are on grade level and they're kind of accelerating, I often use small groups to pre-teach them certain curricular skills so that when we come across that lesson, it's more me guiding them and them kind of taking control of how they're learning the math. If they are like 1 or 2 grade levels below, it's more like remediation, review of skills, making grade level content a little bit more accessible. If they are more than 2 years low, so like 3 or more years, which is kind of common in middle school, I'm using it a lot for one-on-one with them. So it's more like I'm checking in on how they're doing. They might do more early foundational stuff, and it's less pressure for them just because I want them to kind of fall in love more with school, because I feel a lot of those low kids feel like they can't do it and just kind of hit a wall. So small groups for them is a little bit easier. It's a little bit more their speed. They're kind of telling me how much they can do, and I'm just trying to make it as reachable for them as possible.
Pre-teaching cursor skills? I never thought about that for the higher level learners. I love that idea. Shoot, I'm glad we did this. I'm vibing already. So what are the pros and cons of small groups, would you say?
I think the big thing is like teaching a smaller group of kids is always easier than trying to retain the attention of like 20 kids. Like, full stop. You can get through problems a lot easier. Your lessons become mini lessons, and and also it's like a great time to like connect with your students. Like if I feel like I haven't checked in with certain students, I'll pull their small group just because I want to see how they're doing in general.
I love that.
Con, your focus is pulled in so many directions. You're trying to manage students that are doing other activities. You're trying to make sure your students in the small groups are paying attention and following along, and you're trying to be an effective teacher in a small group while you're also like managing a whole class. And I also think sometimes when we're talking about small groups and we're putting these different levels on students, there is this weird, like, I don't want to create some perception of like high, low, medium, it's where their like math level is at, but I don't think that's who they are as math learners. But I think sometimes when teachers are talking about small groups, I think a con could be is just how you perceive your students at different levels.
Perception is key.
Yeah.
How do you, kind of touch on this a little bit, but how do you motivate students in middle school for math small groups, especially if they're not on grade level or if they feel like they've already mastered a skill?
Well, number one thing, if they've already mastered a skill and they're in the small group and they're kind of going ahead or they're just kind of being obnoxious, I take kind of a step back and I kind of probe them to lead the group at that point.
Okay.
If I made an error, if like I assumed that they were at a level or needed more work with a foundational skill, but they actually didn't, then I think that's a great opportunity for them to kind of take lead. I think the big thing in middle school, when you're doing small groups or when you're doing general education, just like normal whole group instruction, I think the number one thing is like those kids want to share their opinions. They want to lead. They want to feel like they're being heard. And I think a big motivator is giving the opportunity for them to lead, recognizing that, hey, you know this, can you teach this to others? My 8th graders, granted it's like a different class, but they literally fight over who gets to like present a problem. I have to present I have to have like 7 problems for everyone to present so they feel like they've been heard.
Each of them. Student leadership is key, and I'm trying to release control in my classroom as well to let them know now that you know the material, what can you teach it to someone? Like that's the next step. If they want to, like you said, I love that. When have you seen small groups most effective in middle school?
I've seen it the most effective when all your small groups, whether they're in a teacher-led group, whether they're doing like an independent activity, whether they're on the laptops on the online platforms, like they're the most effective when they're all engaged. And the way you have to do that is like with intentionality. You have to be really intentional. I feel like sometimes when you're first getting started with small groups, you're putting students on platforms and you're just pulling like your own small group, like a teacher-led small group. And that is completely fine, but I think the intentionality becomes of how are you setting the platform lessons? Like the way you are the most effective is being really intentional. Don't make it busy work. Don't put them on without really like raising or lowering the levels or assigning a specific level or a specific bookmark lesson. It's the most effective when teachers are being the most intentional behind it. When not last year, but the previous year, I had like 32 students in a class and I had my students for like 2 hours. And so the first hour was whole group instruction. And then when I sent them off to the practice problems, the way that I would do it is I would have 5 different groups. And I would start with one of my lower groups, and they would be working on a problem set for a foundational skill to help them. And I was very intentional on making it a foundational skill so they felt like they could do it, because I was just there to kind of get them started before they kind of did the rest on their own. But if I wasn't intentional, if I just gave them the same problem set of everyone else, it would seem too difficult that they would just, they'd hit the level of frustration and they kind of give up, right? And then vice versa, like I had a group of 5 students that were really, really high. Like I didn't really have to show them any of the math problems. They kind of looked at it and figured it out themselves. And I had to be very intentional of what kind of work I was giving them. And so I had to kind of write my own work, like open worded problems for them so that they had time to kind of struggle and work through it. Because if it's too easy, they're going to fool around. If it's too hard, except sometimes with those top students, if it's too hard and usually everything comes easily, they're just kind of like, oh, it's not me. And they were not willing to like work on themselves. So intentionality, you just really have to be intentional with the activities and how you're creating your groups and when you're pulling students.
I think that's something I'm learning right now. Like productive struggle is good for students.
Yes.
And even like my wait time, I'm like, okay, I want to give them the answer, but no, they need to be able to think about it, process it in their head, and be able to do it on their own. Coming from years of experience, you have 5 groups. I pray to get to that because I'm at 3 groups right now. I'm like, that's my limit.
You can do it's the way it usually works when you have 5 groups is you're not giving every group the same. I mean, you're not giving every group a different activity. Mm-hmm. So usually what I would do is I would usually start with one of my middle groups. So either like, just 2 years below or just 1 year below. And I usually start with them just because I want to make sure they get because I mean, in all actuality, those students, I feel like I'm able to move to grade level. Usually my students that are extremely low, like when they're coming to me as like 6th graders and they're operating at like a 1st or 2nd grade level, my goal is to get them closer to like a 3rd or 4th grade level. So I'm not going to always push them because 4 years, like 3 or 4 years of education in 1 year of school is just extremely difficult. And I don't want them to think that they are failing because they're not on grade level by the end of the year. Like it's always about progression. So usually what happens is like, I'll start with those kids. My high kids, I'll probably give them their own independent activity and I'll like probably check in between small groups with them. And then my lower kids on computers until after I pull them, and then I give them their different activities. Like you can have multiple groups doing computers, and then once you pull them, you can give them their own activity. If your high kids finish their worksheet, then they go on computers. If you do the worksheet with like one of your middle groups and they finish it, then they go on, like you're kind of switch swapping when groups do computers, when groups do activities, but you can have like multiple groups do the same thing.
How do you prepare and stay organized for small groups?
There's different ways you can do small group instruction. I enjoy doing the 6-week cycles. And so usually what I do is I don't start small groups until after BOI testing, and then they do a pre-assessment module. And I do both of those to collect data because the pre-assessment module tells me what standards they need help with for that specific unit we're working on. Well, the BOI...
Wait, ready touch that?
No, Eureka.
Oh, okay.
iReady just tells me kind of like overall where their math skills are lacking. And that's like fine. Like I can totally work with that, and it gives me grade levels so that I can adjust like platforms to those grade levels. Like Zern just puts them on, like if I have 5th graders, just puts them all in 5th grade. But on iReady, if they're telling me they're at 2nd grade or they're 1st grade or 3rd grade, then I'll lower their Zern based off of what skills they need for iReady to help them throughout the year. But usually for my small groups is I'm touching on foundational skills based off the pre-assessment for Eureka, because it tells me what skills they use. And then what I use this website called Coherence Mapping. And so what Coherence Mapping does is I can pick on a standard and it tells me all the foundational standards. So like, and then it tells me the future standards. So if I test these kids and we're doing a module that's all about like base 10 numbers, right? And so I know that they need support with this 3rd grade standard about, base 10 numbers, okay? So once we have that standard complete, what's my additional standards, right? Because I have eventually need them to get to a 5th grade standard. Mm-hmm. So I map out 6 weeks. The first week, I usually plan about 2 activities, and I use this lesson plan, and the lesson plan has activities usually I have like 4 or 5 groups per class, right? And so I plan 2 activities with this lesson plan, hitting either that standard completely or maybe part of the standard, and then I just map out 6 weeks with those lesson plans for all of my groups, planning activities. And then what's nice about Eureka is that if I use those foundational skills, I can just look up the standards and get like mini lessons and that sort of thing to use with them.
One last question is, what would you tell a struggling teacher in middle school trying to pull math small groups? What would you tell them?
You gotta start small. I think sometimes when people are talking about small groups, it's like you have to divide all your kids in groups and you have to pull every kid, like every group, and that's not the case. What I would say to them is I would pick 1 to 2 groups that you're gonna focus on for 6 weeks. Be intentional about computer time with the rest of the kids. Focus on those first 2 groups, maybe just plan activities for them, and start small. Because I think when you're trying to pull like 4 or 5 groups and it's too much, like
pull your hair out, it's overwhelming.
Exactly. You need to get good at doing it on a smaller scale before you can start doing it. And I think the other thing, until you feel like they're like intrinsically motivating themselves, prizes don't hurt with like incentivizing.
That was actually another question. How do you motivate the middle school students? But
incentivizing, even though they're in middle school, they love stickers. I have a bin full of stickers, and if they get a certain amount of work, they get a sticker. I have like dojo charts where it's like, collecting dojo points, and you're gonna have to kind of externally motivate them once they get started. Yeah, and then also like don't assume they know how to do small groups, especially in the middle school ages. Every teacher is different. I think sometimes sometimes you can just kind of assume middle school kids know this, but not always. So definitely take
especially if they come from a different school with different teaching styles.
Exactly. Definitely take a day or 2 and just reinforce what's happening during small groups. What's your system if they need help? What's your system if they need to go to the bathroom? Like you're trying to minimize being interrupted when you're in the group as much as possible.
Wow. So she dropped a lot of jewels for us. I definitely cannot wait to go back and watch. So thank you so much for coming on my channel. She is a math middle school rock star, and I appreciate it a lot. So you guys can tell I love having her in my school. We talk all the time. So
we do.
Yeah. Do you want to say any last words to them?
I just think no matter what with teaching, like just be open to trying new things. I always know that I want to keep doing this because I'm always inspired by other teachers or being like, oh, I should try this and change this, and it's a growth process.
Yeah, you only get stuck when you stop growing.
Exactly. Yeah.
So thank you so much. And don't forget to comment down below what's your favorite part if you teach middle school math, and ask her some questions. I can definitely reach out to her.
Yeah,
and
of course.
answer them down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys in my next video. Peace.